We're about to start chapter number 5 of Peter Pan and Wendy by J.M. Barrie. Chapter 5 is titled The Fly-by-Nights. The way to the Neverland was very much longer than Wendy, John and Michael had ever thought. Peter, who said anything that came handy, had made Wendy believe it was as easy as anything to get there. Just second on the right and straight on till morning. Well, it may have been second on the right, but it certainly wasn't straight on after that. Peter took the children such a roundabout way and stopped so often to look at things. A lot of time was lost soon after they started. Of course, it was a great fun to be really flying, to be able to go round church steeples or high chimneys just as if one were a swallow, but it's rather shivery in nighties, and when there has been darks and lights and days and nights and seas and lands without getting anywhere in particular, the little darlings very nearly wished they hadn't come. They were so hungry, but there was nothing to eat, and they were so sleepy, but there was no nice bed to snuggle into. They couldn't help shutting their eyes sometimes as they flew, and if they shut their eyes they drooped down at once, generally over the sea. This happened rather often to Michael because he was the youngest and the sleepiest. He would go falling like a stone towards the water, and Wendy would cry, "Save him, save him," and just as he almost was in the sea, Peter would dive down and catch him, not because he was sorry for Michael, but just to show how clever he was. Peter thought it was all great fun, watching the children fluttering along, while he shot up to the stars and down to the waves and showed off all the cleverness he knew. Sometimes he went out of sight for quite a long while, and they had to fly without a guide, but as best they could. And when he did come back, he had nearly forgotten who they were, and indeed, Wendy had once to tell him her name. It was rather lonely being left alone in the air like this, and they kept on bumping up against clouds, but nobody liked to say anything to blame Peter, because if he were to get across with them and perhaps fly away, how would they reach the Neverland at all? Still, you may be sure they were very, very glad when one evening, after they had been flying ever so long, Peter suddenly said, "There it is." "Where? Where?" "Where all the arrows are pointing." The arrows were the rays of the setting sun. They lit up the whole island. The children knew it at once. They felt as if they had come back home, there to a happy, friendly place, for they could see all the different things they had made believe about. The lagoon was there, and John's flamingo, and Michael's cave, and Wendy's wolf. Indeed, the children seemed to know as much about the island as Peter did. There was nothing he could tell them. This rather annoyed him. But just as they were joyfully calling out to each other, "There's my boat, there's the redskin camp, look at the turtles," and so on, the sun sank. The Neverland grew dark. It grew darker every moment. It didn't look happy or friendly any longer, and the children felt frightened. Nobody would be who was used to going to sleep with the night lights. There were no light nights here, no nursery, no Nana, no dear, delightful Mrs. Darling. There were only themselves, and Peter, who might very likely leave them in the dark, just for the fun. They were flying over the island now, so low that sometimes their feet touched the treetops. They kept as close to Peter as they could, and the horrid part was they felt as if somebody or something was trying to stop them, so they had to push their way, yet there was nothing to be seen. Peter, who seemed very gay and cheerful, said, "They don't want us to land." Who could they be? By and by he wanted to know which they would rather have. First, an adventure or tea. Wendy and Michael wanted tea, but John thought he would like the adventure, until he found out what sort of adventure it was. Peter said there was a pirate asleep in the grass just beneath them, and if John liked, they could go down and kill him. John, however, could not see the pirate, and thought it would be best to have tea first. Then he asked, "Are there many pirates on the island now?" "Never known so many," said Peter. "Who is their captain?" Peter looked very grave and stern as he answered with one word, "Hook." "Not Jas Hook?" "Yes." This was dreadful. Michael began to cry, and John had a nasty dry feeling in his throat. But they had heard of Jas Hook, even in the peacefulness of their nursery and the quiet of the kindergarten. The name of Hook made people very uneasy. There was no pirate, alive or dead, quite so terrible as Hook, and now they were, as you may say, nearly face to face with him. He was the last man they had ever expected to meet. "What is he like?" said John, with a gulp. "Is he big?" "Not as big as he was." "How do you mean?" "I got off a bit of him." "You?" "Yes, me," said Peter, rather snappishly. "I didn't mean to be rude," said John. "Oh, all right. But what bit did you cut off?" "His right hand." John cheered up on hearing this and said, "Then he can't fight now?" Peter replied, "Oh, can't he just? He has an iron hook now instead of a hand, and he claws with it." Everybody turned pale. "Now, John, look here." "Yes?" "Say aye, aye, sir," said Peter sharply. John was feeling so serious about Hook that he said, "Aye, aye, sir," as meek as a mouse. "Every boy who serves under me," said Peter, "has got to promise one thing. So must you. It's this: if we meet Hook in open fight, you must leave him to me. Don't go at him yourself." "Aye, aye, sir," said John. "I promise." Meanwhile, Tinker Bell was lighting their way quite nicely by going round and round them as they flew. They could not see much of the island below them, but they could see Peter and each other. Peter stopped every few minutes or two and listened. He could poise in the air like a bird, staring down through the darkness. Then he would go on again without explaining anything. This made the children rather uneasy, but they thought he must know what he was about. By and by he suddenly said, "Tink tells me the pirates sighted us before it was dark." "Oh dear. And they have got out their big gun." "Long Tom." "They can see Tink's light, of course, and they're likely to let fly, because they know we must be near it." "Oh, Wendy." "Oh, John." "Oh, Michael." "Oh, Peter." They all three cried, "Do tell her to go away." Peter replied that he certainly should not. "She's frightened," he said. "She thinks we have lost the way." Wendy said, "Then tell her to put her light out." "She can't. It never goes out unless she's asleep." John cried, "Then tell her to go to sleep." "She can't. A fairy can't sleep unless she's sleepy." This made things very difficult. "If only one of us had a pocket to carry her in," said Peter. But nobody had. Pockets are very seldom put into nighties, and never in skeleton leaves, like Peter's suit. Then Peter remembered John's top hat. Tink did not object to being put into that, so it was first carried by John and afterwards by Wendy, and Tink's light was so completely hidden, nobody could have known she was there. It was very dark without her, though, and everything was so still, except for a few queer sounds, which could well have been done without. But the children found it darker and lonelier than ever. They went on flying through the silent night, and at last Michael whimpered that he didn't like it being so lonely. He said, if only something would make some noise. It did. There was a most enormous bang, which echoed like a roaring lion all around them. The pirates had fired Long Tom on the chance of hitting Peter or someone, and this explosion did a lot of harm, for it scattered all the children away from each other. John and Michael found themselves all alone. Peter was blown out to sea. Wendy was blown upwards, carrying Tinker Bell in the hat. It was a pity Wendy did not drop the hat, for Tink, who hated her, at once came out of it and tried to get rid of Wendy. Tink could only be one thing at a time, either all bad or all good. Just at present she was all bad. She tinkled most beautifully at Wendy as she flew to and fro. Wendy, who was so kind herself that she never dreamed of anybody wanting to hurt her, thought that Tink was offering to show her the way. Peter cried, "Wendy, John, Michael, wherever are you? Do answer." But everything was silent. There was only Tinker Bell to help her, so she followed that deceitful tinkle. Chapter 6. The Neverland. The people of the Neverland had a feeling that Peter would soon be home again, so they began to wake up and get ready for him, so that when he came he might find them all very busy. You see, while he was away, they always kept quiet. Nobody bothered to fight anybody else, but Peter liked things to be exciting, so now things had to be made exciting as fast as possible. There were 6 sorts of people who lived in the island. 1, the fairies, mostly high up in nests in the tall trees. 2, the mermaids, in the lagoon, mostly deep down under the water. 3, the wild beasts, whose dens were in the woods and mountains. 4, the redskin Indians, who camped anywhere they chose. 5, the pirates, who returned every night to their brig, the Jolly Roger. The lost boys, whose home, a very nice one, was underground, as you will hear. All these were enemies except the fairies and the mermaids, who kept well out of the way, and in the evening when Peter and the little darlings got there, everybody was moving round and round the island after each other, very fierce. It was a great change, for they were at peace and quiet while Peter was away. The redskins had been having a large greedy feast for 6 days and nights. The wild beasts had been attending to their young ones, and the pirates and lost boys, if they happened to meet, merely bit their thumbs at each other and passed on. But the islanders could make themselves fierce all in a minute, and now they were moving on each other's tracks slowly and silently. The lost boys were looking for Peter, the captain whom they expected back every minute. The pirates were looking for the lost boys, the redskins were hunting the pirates, and the wild beasts were prowling after the redskins. The lost boys, instead of being slim and graceful like Peter in his skeleton leaf suit, were dressed in the skins of bears, which they had killed. They were almost round like balls of fur. Indeed, they were so round that if they fell, they rolled about, so they had to be careful not to fall. Each wore a dagger, and they crept along very softly, one by one, looking as if they were saying, "Hush." There were 6 of them. Tootles, who was kind and brave, but always unlucky. Nibs, a light-hearted boy, and Slightly, the most conceited of them all. Next came Curly, a regular pickle, and the twins, who had no names because they got lost before their mother had made up her mind what to call them. These boys were quite unlike each other except for the bearskins, but most of all they were unlike Peter. Indeed, Peter had forbidden them to look the least bit like him. But directly the lost boys had gone on into the dark, there came a gang of ugly ruffians, the ugliest ever were seen. Before they were in sight, their horrid voices could be heard bawling in a verse of their favourite song, and this was it. Avast belay, yo-ho, heave to, a-pirating we go, and if we're parted by a shot, we're sure to meet below. The most dreadful lot of pirates they were. How many I cannot say, but some of the worst of them were an Italian named Sirocco, and a huge man generally called the Blackamoor, because that's what he was, and Smee the boatswain, and Gentleman Starkey, and Bill Dukes, and Skylights. They were all over scars and tattooed marks, with pistols, cutlasses, daggers, knives, muskets, and many other cutting and shooting things. The pirate captain, Jas Hook, lay smoking 2 cigars at once in a sort of chariot which his men moved along. If they did not go quick enough, he frightened them by shaking his iron hook or claw. They obeyed him as if they were dogs, because they were so afraid of being clawed. He was a strange-looking man, with long black curls and very polite manners. He had never been known to show any fear in his life, unless he caught sight of his own blood, which was a very ugly colour, but this hardly ever happened. The pirates passed, making their hideous noise, and a few minutes afterwards the redskins followed. If you had not seen the pirate first, you would have wanted to run away from the redskins. They wore no clothes, but were well oiled all over, and their eyes glittered in the dark. Their chief was called Great Big Little Panther. He went in front on all fours, so that he might look more like a panther. But as he and the whole of his tribe had just been stodging frightfully, he was feeling much too fat. The only person who had not overeaten was the beautiful Princess Tiger Lily. She walked last of all, very proud and upright. The redskins stole out of sight, and very soon the wild beasts appeared, an enormous number of them, dreadful creatures, with large teeth showing and red tongues hanging out. Lions, tigers, bears, and other big animals, and a lot of smaller beasts, all savage and all hungry. When these had gone by, there was still one more to pass. It has not been mentioned before. It came making curious noises as it crept along. It was a large and very large crocodile. There was nobody after the crocodile, because the lost boys did not know it was there. They appeared again presently, having gone right round the island. They were tired and lay down on the turf, which indeed was the roof of their underground home. and every one of them said, "I do wish Peter would come back." They meant to keep the pirates off. Slightly said in his conceited way, "I am the only one who is not afraid of the pirates." But directly after he repeated that he wished Peter would come back, the lost boys who were feeling lonely began to talk about their mothers. They could only do this when Peter was away, because he thought mothers were silly. However, the lost boys would have liked some mothers to look after them just then. And while they talked, there was a distinct sound that they knew it much too well. It was the pirate's song getting closer. The lost boys disappeared at once, all except Nibs, who went to watch out for the pirates. How did they hide so quickly? Why, close to where they lay were 7 large hollow trees, a tree for each boy and one for Peter. These were the secret stairs and the doorways to the delightful home under the ground. Hook had no notion where to find it, but now here was Hook himself, the moment after, with his horrible pirate crew. They caught sight of Nibs scuttling among the trees, and Hook sent them to search for the other boys. He was left alone with his boatswain Smee. He began to tell Smee the story of his life. Smee did not understand it in the least, but Hook went on speaking. Most of all, said Hook, "I hate Peter Pan. It was he who cut off my arm and threw it to the crocodile. And the crocodile liked my arm so much, Smee, that it has followed me everywhere since, wanting the rest of me. I have often noticed," said Smee, "that you were oddly afraid of crocodiles. Only that one crocodile. It's waiting, I tell you, for the rest of me, and I'm waiting to get hold of Peter Pan." As Hook spoke, he sat down upon a large mushroom. "But listen, Smee, that crocodile once swallowed a clock, and the clock goes tick, tick, tick inside it, so I can hear it coming along, and I have time to get away." Smee answered that someday the clock must stop, and then, he said, the crocodile will get you. Hook was just saying that he knew that when he suddenly jumped up. He cried, "Why, this mushroom is hot. I'm nearly burning." And he and the boatswain tried very gingerly to pull the mushroom up. It came up at once, for it had no root, but there was a hole where it had been, and smoke came out of the hole. No wonder Hook felt hot. The mushroom was the stopper for the lost boys' chimney, and the 2 pirates could hear the lost boys chattering gaily down below. The home under the ground had been found at last, and soon Hook noticed the 7 hollow trees. He stood thinking for a long time, making a plan to trap the lost boys whilst Peter was away. He told Smee what it was like this: "We will go back to the ship and cook a large rich cake with green sugar on it. We will leave the cake on the shore of the mermaid's lagoon, and when the boys come to play with the mermaids, they will find it. They have no mother, so they don't know it is dangerous to eat rich, damp chocolate, and so they will gobble it up, and they will die. Ha 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 ha!" Hook and Smee laughed and danced with joy at the thought of this wicked plan, and they began to sing the pirate's song, but they heard a little wee sound. They stopped to listen. Yes, it certainly was. Tick, 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 tick. It was the crocodile. Hook ran away in a terrible fright. Smee was not so frightened, because the crocodile was not coming after him, but he ran away too. The lost boys, little thinking that their enemies had been listening down their chimney, came up into the open air. Nibs was not there, but directly afterwards he rushed up to them. A pack of wolves was close behind. Baying and hanging out their tongues at Nibs, he fell upon the ground and cried, "Save me! Save me!" That was easier said than done. The boys had to think as fast as anything, because the wolves were not waiting to think at all. They said to each other, what would Peter do? Why, Peter would look at them through his legs. And they bent double and went backwards at the wolves, looking at them through their legs. The wolves saw 5 pairs of eyes looking angrily at them upside down, and they were so worried that they fled. When Nibs had got his breath back, he said, "I have seen a wonderful thing. There's a great white bird flying this way, and as it flies it moans, 'Poor Wendy.'" "There are birds, I remember, called Wendy's," said Slightly. He always pretended to remember things in England before he got lost and was taken to the island. "There it is, coming now," cried Curly. They could see Wendy flying overhead and hear her sad cries. Tinker Bell was pinching her all over. Tink's light was flashing to and fro, and she was making a shrill tinkling. The boys were very puzzled. They shouted, "Hello, Tink!" And the naughty little thing replied, "Peter wants you to shoot the Wendy." They rushed down underground to fetch their bows and arrows, all except Tootles, who had his with him. "Quick, quick, Tootles!" screamed Tink. "Peter will be so pleased." "Get out of the way, Tink!" shouted Tootles, and he shot up at Wendy. Wendy fluttered down and lay quite still, with an arrow in her breast. That is the end of chapter 6. I hope you enjoyed it. Obviously, it's a bit of a cliffhanger. I will be continuing again. I hope you will join me for chapter 7, The Little House is Built.